Hello, my name is Amy K. Watson. I am the CEO and head coach of Career Leadership Alignment, and I have invited a colleague to come and speak with us today about women of color in the workplace, and especially in terms of career. Um, there's a lot that's been going on in the world, and I feel like there's so much work for us to do. We've got companies putting out Black Lives Matter messages, which is, on the one hand, really great to see. And I'm assuming that anyone watching this video understands that just saying those words, while that's a great place to start, it's not the place to stop. We need to follow it up with action. And so that's why we're having this conversation, so that you can have some actionable information. One of the things that I have noticed as being different in the conversations right now, as opposed to what's happened in the past, is that we seem to be in a different stage of change. Changes have to begin with some awareness of what the problem is and what changes are being asked for. And that awareness can then ignite some desire to actually make the change happen. And it feels like since the death of Trayvon Martin, that awareness has slowly been growing in ways that it did not seem to grow after, for instance, the Rodney King issues and riots and all of that happened. So we're in this stage where a lot of us have learned about implicit bias. We have begun to get more of a sense in this dominant culture of what it's like for African Americans in particular, and people of color more in general, what it's like for them to live in the United States. We've learned about implicit bias. We've started practicing noticing our own biases in action and how it affects our decisions. And then, so this awareness prepared us so that when Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and especially George Floyd, and now Rayshard Brooks, when all of these things happened, we were able to move into the next stage. And so what happens after that desire is we have a need for knowledge. We need to learn more about what exactly are we supposed to do? How do things need to be different? So it's become clear that one of the things we need to do to address what's happening in our public safety realm, and another thing that's coming to light, is racism in the workplace and how that's been playing out. So we're here today together to start providing some of that knowledge about what exactly can help a company to move beyond just saying Black Lives Matter. So that is why I have invited Erika Pryor to join me. Erika, would you start us off by telling us more about who you are and some of the things that you have been doing around career coaching?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, for having me on and creating this forum to really kind of talk more about some of the dynamics around racism and white supremacy as it goes through our culture. As you said, I think a lot of people are really coming to the understanding that it's not just racism over here and then hiring, racism over here and then police brutality, that it's all very interconnected, and you can't really eradicate racism without looking at it across a number of systems and institutions. So love this forum that we can really talk about it in a specific way as it relates to women and people of color around hiring. Again, as Amy said, my name is Dr. Erika Pryor, and I currently am the Chief Community Builder and just recently launched an online and offline community of support called Epic Career Network. And we help job seekers and career advancement professionals find and do their most authentic work. And one of the reasons that I started this online community was really out of my own challenges and frustrations, having been wrapped up a job in December of 2019. and spent some time in January just kind of like re-engaging my network and talking with people and seeing like what was happening. And this was pre-COVID, so I put myself on a networking plan for 30 days. I said I'm going to meet with 30 people in 30 days, which was actually great. I ended up meeting with probably about 45 people in 40 days, so I was very busy. I was like the busiest unemployed person I knew. It was great. Like I met a lot of people, re-engaged a lot of people that I hadn't chatted with. And so originally I was going to form this consulting company that was going to have some high level strategic planning in and around like marketing, which is part of my background. Then COVID happened and all of my project leads really dried up. People were cutting marketing and, you know, just slashing budgets to try and figure out how to weather the storm. And during that time, I did talk with a lot of women of color, specifically just about their job challenges and career challenges. And I heard a lot of similar stories around challenges to advance, difficulty finding a sponsor, invisibility in the workplace, retaliation for trying to draw boundaries. And I had experienced a lot of those things myself. And so, of course, for a long time, I thought it was me and that I'm alone and that this is just happening to me and that I'm the issue. And frequently, that's the position that you are made to feel in the workplace. And so, one of the things that I wanted to do after seeing just the massive unemployment that was coming through just day after day, you know, I remember when they decided that we're not going to report on unemployment numbers every day because it's probably depressing people. And I was really like, I was really conscious of that because I was like, huh, that's saying something. Like there's some morale that we're trying to cultivate. And so I said, well, if women and people of color have a challenge getting into jobs under the bestest of conditions, what will it look like for us under the most competitive job market we may ever see in our life? Because this is much more competitive than even the recession of 2008, 2009. And so, what's it going to look like for us? Like, how are we going to survive and thrive as we see so many small businesses, and specifically small businesses run by people of color, not able to weather the storm of COVID? And so that just really prompted me to figure out a way to help more individuals figure out how to survive and thrive COVID, and not be left out of the rapid reemployment that we anticipate will start coming in some of the months here in the next third and fourth quarters. And so one of the things that I also recognized from those conversations was that women and people of color really have a hard time getting honest feedback. A lot of those conversations resulted in people being released from their jobs with no prior notice. And it's a right to work state. So organizations have the right to do that, but also recognize that that churn has a financial and a fiscal impact. So if you can prevent the churn, it would seem to be the case that you would want to do that. But I found that, you know, women and people of color were having a really hard time getting honest feedback. And a lot of that really stemmed from unconscious bias around how people anticipated that women and people of color were going to react to perhaps negative feedback, or just a lack of willingness to be managed by managers. And we know this everywhere. Not every person is a leader that's in a management position, and not every person is a manager in a leadership position. But there seemed to be a thread of people of color and women just feeling like, I can't get honest feedback. I can't get people to tell me like where I need to course correct or where the challenges are. And I too experienced that, having been in positions where I was told, you know, in an official capacity, I'm doing great. And the next thing I know, I'm being asked to leave the organization and not really having any sort of information as to how we got from here to here. So that's really why I decided to launch Epic Career Network, is to create a space where career advancement professionals and job seekers could get real honest feedback from individuals who are really steeped in the job market and who really were on their side and saying, yes, we want you to achieve your goals and we want you to accomplish. And we're a third party. So we're not your friend necessarily. We're not going to tell you what you want to hear. We want to tell you what's going to get you to the next level and get you the results that you want so that you can find the job that's going to allow you to be your most authentic self, do your best work, and really make the impact that you want to make in the world.
Wow. So you're really bringing to mind for me this challenge that a lot of managers and supervisors have around giving people feedback. And a lot of folks, that's a skill set that they just kind of don't really have themselves. But then adding in the power dynamics and a growing sense of not knowing how not to trip the triggers. So I think that men giving feedback to women, white folks giving feedback to people of color, there can be a real fear that if I give this feedback, it's going to be perceived as having something to do with uh, this visible difference, and I'm not going to be heard. So a situation that's already kind of an anxiety producing situation, it ratchets up the anxiety. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for someone who is a manager or a supervisor that feels like they need to give some feedback, but they're afraid of doing the wrong thing. What would you want them to be thinking about?
I think that's a great question. So I think what I would want that person to think about is number one, to start unpacking where does that fear come from? Because frequently, if you are unaware of the narratives that you have, and I'm just going to take myself. So if you're unaware of the narratives that you have around Black women being angry, being difficult to work with, being people who are going to put you in your place. Like we sort of have this reputation that we're all going to give it to you real. And not everyone operates in that. Those are narratives that we have seen perpetuated in media and in society for so many years that we, again, don't realize that we're holding on to this. But if you already have this fear and anxiety that your feedback will trigger something or will be taken in a racialized manner, then that's the first place that you need to start unpacking those issues, because that means that your unconscious bias is both informing your work performance and now it is negatively impacting this other person's work performance. And there's nothing I can do for you to figure out your unconscious bias. There's nothing I can do, right? That's the HR manager's job as the manager or the decision maker or the supervisor. So I think that's step one. I think step two is then, making the leap to have the conversation with the person that maybe, I haven't really, managed someone of color before, or this is kind of a new experience in terms of giving feedback. I'm going to do the best that I can. And if there's places and spaces where I say something that feels like it's, out of pocket, let's have a conversation about that so we can clear that air right away. Because frequently what also happens in those experiences is that because of that power dynamic, the employee doesn't feel like they have space to give any feedback or respond to that feedback. You're basically told, like, this is what it is. This is what you're doing. Do you agree? Sign here and you're on your way. And so, that's not a feedback loop. And so again, if we're thinking about performance reviews and intermittent just check-ins to help people sort of course correct and know where they're doing, really having the desire to support this person in their career. If you start there versus starting with how am I going to feel about giving this person feedback, I think you've done a good job of trying to redirect what the goal and the purpose of the feedback is. It's not for the manager, it's for the employee. And then if you've re-examined sort of what some of your unconscious biases are as to what is giving me anxiety about this moment, that I may not be experiencing the same anxiety when I give feedback to someone who perhaps looks more like me, then you can then perhaps come from a space and have the conversation with both your employee and with, say, your higher ups to be like, hey, this is sort of going on and I'm recognizing this. And this is something that I need to make sure I work on so that I can continue to support my team in a way that's going to be inclusive and equitable across.
Oh, that's beautiful. There's three main things that I love about what you shared there. The first is that I've got stuff going on inside my own head that I need to work through, and I can recognize that that's happening because of the anxiety that's coming up. And so as soon as I recognize that anxiety, I need to find a colleague or an HR business partner, somebody that I can, or a coach, somebody that I can talk that through with so they can help me to unpack that. The second piece is behaviorally, I may have habits that I can't even see are happening. So I need to ask for feedback. And the main person who's seeing what I'm doing might actually be that direct report, that person of color who I need to actually open the door and make it safe for them to let me know how I'm doing and to let them know I am open to learning. I am interested, I'm curious, and I'm not coming from a place of judgment against you. I'm coming from a place of really strong interest in doing this more effectively. And then the third thing that you said that really hit me is the the desire to benefit somebody else is the reason for giving feedback. It's not about I'm irritated and I need to offload my anxiety onto somebody else. So if the anxiety is happening, it's not because the other person is doing something wrong. It's because something is happening inside. That's when I need to talk to somebody else. And after I've worked that out and I've gotten feedback about my behavior, then I can just give you the feedback that you need in order for you to improve your performance and do better. And that is what benefits both of us and benefits our organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that those are three ways that if people are really sort of struggling with like, how do I manage a person of color? Because I know that that's a question that people have, or how do I manage a woman if I've never done that before? And so, really when we say like check your biases at the door, I think that's one strategy where people can check their biases at the door. And then just like you said, recenter yourself as to what is your purpose in giving the feedback. Because if you've got all this anxiety and anger, or hurt or upset or whatever the emotions are, all that's going to come through in your words, all that's going to come through in your demeanor, and just from a basic communication standpoint, you can't bottle that up and like decompartmentalize it from that moment. And so, that then becomes also the things that your direct report or the person that you're providing feedback to gets. And those can be the things that are just as damaging to a professional relationship between colleagues as well as with the organization, as the feedback itself.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about feedback. Difficulties in receiving feedback is one part of the experience of women of color in a business environment. What else might an HR manager or business partner need to understand about the experience of women or women of color in a business environment?
Absolutely. So there's a number, and there's actually a really wide swath of literature that is around Black women leadership and Black women leadership in senior administrative levels, because the experiences definitely change as one moves up the organizational hierarchy. So that's probably one thing to note, is that the experiences of Black women at, say, entry level positions are going to be somewhat different than the experiences of Black women at, say, more senior level positions.
Can
And
you offer an example of one way that those differences show up?
I think for Black women in senior level positions, one thing that becomes really clear to you is that you become less visible in your position. And so this really manifests itself when people are talking about promotional and career advancement opportunities. So frequently, women of color are tasked with doing more work, just tangibly more work than their white counterparts or colleagues. There's lots of instances where women of color are receiving less pay for doing more work or the same amount of work. And we already know that women of color earn what, like 50 or 60 cents on the dollar, which is still low compared to men of color and white women as well. So there's this lack of visibility for the work that you're doing. And then if there's extra work on top of it, there's a lack of visibility there. And then there's also a lack of visibility around the expectation that you will do some of the emotional work in and around diversity and inclusion. And so if you're a Black woman or a person of color that is in a position in an organization where you may be one of 4 or 5 individuals, you sort of already maintain this high level of visibility just because you are a person of color and you are in a role or in an organization that has few people that look like you. And so then there's this expectation that the DEI work you're going to want to do and the emotional labor of helping, people work through their issues, that you're going to want to do that. And so then what happens when management and opportunities to move up come to fruition, you are invisible and you are not seen, or the additional work you've been doing has been identified as like, great, thanks for doing it, but that's not what your job is. And so we can't promote you because you either haven't been doing well at your actual job because you're doing all these additional responsibilities, or we can't promote you because you're doing so well, we can't imagine that you would be doing something else. And so there's definitely this sort of role definition in terms of like where we want Black women sometimes to be and how we want you to navigate the organization and providing or not providing opportunities to navigate an organization. And so in my own experience, I was hired at an organization here locally. I interviewed for one position, but then they decided that I would probably be better suited for another position, which was a very legitimate like switch. They hired in a white man to do the position I had previously hired for. They hired him in at a higher salary with less responsibilities. Within 6 months, he was let go from the organization. So they gave me his responsibilities to maintain as well as my own. Within another 2 months, the supervisor was released from the organization. So during the interim, I was doing a great deal of his work as well. And when the conversation came around to who would we promote to the director level position, I know that there are a couple people who are advocating for me because they were like, look at what she's doing. Like, she's basically the marketing department in managing these other 2 employees and managing the responsibilities. And the argument was, well, she hasn't been here long enough, so we couldn't possibly promote her. And that seems to me to be a real case of, just invisibility. Like, we see you doing all the work and you're doing great, and we just want you to stay right there.
Mm.
Thank you. And as though you don't have the same desires to, move up and have accomplishments and milestones in your career that others do. And in fact, like other people who had been there longer, but again, doing less work, they were offered promotion at the end of the year, and I was not. And I said, you know what? I don't think that you necessarily want me to be anyplace else but here. And I'm the type of one of those people, like, once I've mastered something, like, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. And it was just really difficult place to figure out how to navigate. There weren't any specific organizational structures or paths around creating a career path. And so you just sort of tried. And if you failed and tried and failed, like, but once I sort of got word that people were advocating, and that was sort of the response, well, she hasn't been here long enough. It's like, I don't know what long enough has to do with like work performance and being able to manage the responsibilities.
Right. right. Especially
So that
since so many
invisibility
companies
is
just
a
go ahead
key.
and hire in from the outside.
Right. You've got to, manage somebody new and bring them on board and get them up to speed. Again, so you have that sort of churn. But invisibility is just a really big issue with women and people of color, and sort of this additional workload. Again, there's a narrative around that. Women and people of color are workers. They're hard workers. You give them anything to do. You give them the most impossible projects. I've been given the most impossible projects where people have been like, other people have failed. So there's probably an expectation that you're going to fail too. You're our last hope in making this happen. And that's a really difficult position to be in as well. And then you achieve the impossible and you don't get rewarded for it. So that lack of invisibility is one thing, and that extra workload, and that extra emotional work that goes around diversity, equity, inclusion. Those are three ways that women and people of color are very much like disadvantaged. And as we are now understanding, those are additional stressors that negatively both impact your engagement at work, but also your health and your mental well-being as well.
Right, right. Yeah, so I'm definitely hearing the unconscious bias playing out in those situations. I remember the first time I recognized that I had some implicit bias. I can't remember which television news anchor it was who was stepping down or retiring or whatever, but I remember automatically assuming that sort of the next person that could step into that was Chris Cuomo. And I remember somebody asking me, like, oh, okay, so you like Chris Cuomo? And I thought, yeah, sure. And he seemed perfect. Uh, but then it was Diane, oh gosh, I've forgotten her last name now. Uh, blonde Diane Sawyer, who wound up taking that job. And it was when she took the job that I suddenly realized, oh, I just have this assumption that news anchors are white men. And it didn't even occur to me that somebody else was capable of doing that job. And it sounds very much like that same kind of assumption that, the director of the marketing department has always been a white guy. So that is the kind of person who does that work. And even if there's somebody else who can step in and do it in the interim, that's not a long-term solution because that's not a white guy. And none of those thoughts are conscious. They're always just kind of assumptions in the background. And it keeps you from being recognized for your gifts and the work that you can do and your incredible accomplishments and the strength and resiliency that you're bringing to being able to step into that kind of situation and produce the results.
Right. I think that for a lot of white women, that is a very legitimate um, strategy towards promotion, is to be that person who says, I'll step in, I'll do the extra work, I'll, try and make it happen, I'll keep things moving. And frequently for white women, they are rewarded with being named that, permanent position.
Mm.
But for a lot of women and people of color, as you said, there's this assumption that I can't really see you in this role, even though you're really doing the work and you're, thriving at it and you're successful and you're making sure that things are moving forward. It's like you cannot be seen as that person who can do anything, right? It's this idea that white people can be seen to do anything. You can have no training. You can be Tom Cruise and decide that you're going to be a samurai, and people will accept that you can become a samurai with just a little bit of training and crossing some geographic boundaries. And I know this is like a silly example, but it's what it is that, white supremacy has made it such that white people can always see other white people in positions. And for many people of color, that same internalized narrative comes for you. And so sometimes it is hard for you to see yourself in those roles. And since you don't see other people in those roles, you make assumptions about like what the opportunity is or is not for you there. But just imagine if, and I was looking at this the other day, if Mr. Rogers was played by someone of color. Just imagine.
Right.
People would be out of their mind, right? Like people were upset when 007 was played by Idris Elba. How could we? How could that be possible? well, there's nothing really that defines 007 as being a white man, except he's always only been played by white men. But there's nothing really white about him. So when Idris Elba was elected to play 007, I was like, this sounds great. He's a good action star. Like, there's nothing that's really, and Black folks love 007. I grew up watching that with my parents, but it's really hard sometimes for white folks to imagine people of color in these other roles that they have not been already defined and seen in. And for hiring managers, getting past that unconscious bias, or for folks that want to be allies or sponsors, getting past that unconscious bias is really important, because frequently that's then how women of color end up moving through the ranks. Is we have some advocates that are on the inside that are speaking to those decision makers and helping them see the opportunity. It's not necessarily by taking on that additional work and assuming that will be rewarded for it, but is really sort of doing some internal agitation and finding sponsors or supporters that can speak on your behalf for you.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So, so when a leadership or a management role does need to be filled, there's this issue of invisibility, the unconscious bias that is happening. So there's sometimes a company will try to engage in some kind of a color blind process. Um, can you describe what the value is that you can see in doing that, or what should we be aware of around those kinds of things?
Okay. It's a great question, Amy. I think that people should attempt to dismantle their ideas around colorblind processes and assume that processes are in fact not colorblind, because they are created by people who are informed by unconscious biases that then inform how the process or how the product operates, right? And so we can see this in an example of like Google's facial recognition, or what we commonly know around motion sensors, is that they're not really based on motion, they're based on skin tone. Those programs are created by folks that didn't think about other skin tones besides the ones that they most saw frequently. So you can sort of take that example and apply it to a colorblind process, in the sense that no process is created without people, therefore it's not colorblind. And so that's one thing that I think is really important to
So
note.
I want to interject here, and just to make sure I understand. So you're saying that even if the panel of people who are reviewing resumes and performance reviews don't know the applicants, don't have pictures of the applicants, and can't see the names of the applicants, there's still going to be something that will, just because of the way the process was designed, if it was designed by white folks, there's still going to be some way of being influenced by these disparities that we won't even be aware of.
Absolutely. And so perhaps in that instance, it may not, you may not have any of that sort of identifying information. And I know that's something that a lot of employers try and utilize as an attempt to be a little more colorblind in their process. So then it goes down to, what are the criterion that you have identified that make a candidate qualified or unqualified for the position? And then what are sort of the things that are nice to have and things that are like a must have. And what people can then do is start looking at the application materials, and you can start creating narratives around what's included in there, right? If you see this person has gone to an HBCU versus has gone to a community college, you might start making some assumptions about their level of qualification based on their educational background.
Mm.
So that's not unconscious. That's very conscious, right? Like, it's very well known, if you went to Harvard, well, we can just assume that you are a very intelligent person, even though your parents might have paid your way through. that does, but that's an unconscious bias that we have, in the same way that we make assumptions about, where you got your IT training, if you got your IT certifications. We make assumptions about, if your hometown is included on there, even who your reviewers are or your references, right? If those references are well-known people in the industry, we feel like we are able to trust you more. If those references are all Black women, well, that's interesting. Why would you put all Black women as your references? So there are assumptions and narratives that you can create based on the content that you have in front of you. And you can easily start eliminating people who perhaps either do or don't meet the criterion, or meet the criteria, and you're like, well, I'm not really sure. So even in that process, you can't be colorblind, because you're reviewing the information. There are individuals that are reviewing the information. They're drawing assumptions around, who this person is and what their capabilities are. Don't let somebody on that panel have gone to the same college or university as that individual. That automatically, can privilege people in certain kinds of ways. So yeah, my first argument is that there aren't any processes that are really colorblind, regardless of whether people are intimately involved or not.
Wow. Okay. So I think now that what the picture I'm starting to put together is that really the best thing to do is acknowledge that there are people of color in the pool, acknowledge that there are internal unconscious biases, try as much as possible to recognize them as they come out, and maybe make sure that your panel is a nice mix. It's not just a panel of white folks who all share the same unconscious biases and assumptions. Uh,
Absolutely. I think it's really, I think, as you said, people feel like a little bit level of comfort when they take off some of those very common identification markers. But then they forget that there's still a 2 or 3 page resume, there's still a cover letter, there's still a richness of information. Then people, of course, are going to social media, they're going to LinkedIn, so they can get greater information about, what you look like and what else has perhaps not been included on your resume, and draw assumptions from there, and then determine, if they think you're a good fit for the organization. And I think that's another place where unconscious bias really plays, the biggest part, is around this idea of fit. I can't tell you how many times I've been told, like, we're just not sure you're a good fit. We're just not sure that this is the right fit for you, or that, the culture is a good fit for you. And so it's really then kind of looking at what are the pillars of your organizational culture, and what does fit mean? Like, does fit mean somebody will come in and they won't be disruptive, and they won't have, a different way of doing things? And they, I mean, when people say diversity and then they say fit, it's almost contradictory, because it's like they want you to sort of just slip right in, and just everything is golden. But on the same token, they say we want you to be a diverse in your approach and diverse in your thoughts, and those are sometimes the things that are opposite of fit. So thinking about, like, what does fit mean from an unconscious bias standpoint, and are we privileging people who are like us? Could we do an inventory of certain teams, or the organization, and see that a lot of people came from this same organization? That's not really diverse. So let's think about what that looks like. Like, why are we privileging that? And what is that doing to help us or to hurt our inclusive goals? Also thinking about, like, actual diverse candidate pools, and your capacity and appetite for diversity. I've certainly been in positions with my previous role where people are asking, like, yes, we want diverse candidates, we're really excited to bring in more women onto the team and sort of get that diverse thought that we're looking for. But then when you send them a portfolio of candidates, they say, okay, we want to talk to these 2 white dudes. And you're like, well, and they're like, yeah, we just didn't think the women were a fit. Well,
mm,
then you're not really interested in having women on your team now, are you? So it really is like, matching up the words with the culture and with what you're trying to accomplish. And that is unconscious in some instances, and sometimes it's really conscious. People just want to look like they're doing the work, but they're not really interested in doing the work.
Right. I love that too, that you use the word disrupt uh, in terms of talking about culture, desired culture and fit, because there is this narrative in business now that we want to disrupt the industry. We want to disrupt product development. We want to be the disruptors. And at the same time, I know that us white folks like to have our nice quiet offices where we just concentrate, and we have an assumption that having somebody in the office who is perhaps from a different culture than our own, they are going to be a disruptor in a very different sense, and that's uncomfortable. We don't want to have the noise. We don't want to have, we don't want to be confronted with something that's not perfectly comfortable.
Girl, I could tell you how many times, and this is literally the conversation I was having with one of my clients, telling you earlier, who does a lot of work in Black women leadership. And there is very much the sense, and you know it, that your mere presence is disruptive to the organization, to the team, that you just being there, you don't have to do anything else, but you just being there and doing your job is truly disruptive. And, my very tacit example of that comes from working with a company where, again, I was, filling in for the director. I'm doing some very high level statewide marketing campaigns, and it's such that it's so involved that it's literally 60 or 70 hours a week. So you just don't have any time to do anything at work but work. And that was very frustrating for me as well, because I couldn't really have the time to, go to the lunch and learns and get to meet more employees and get a better sense of, what else is available here. But that notwithstanding, what I came to realize about a year and a half into the position was how disruptive my behavior and myself was, such that, there was a laundry list that was collected of complaints about my disruptive self that had nothing to do with my work performance. It was, we don't like her hair. She has a shaved head. She wears ethnic clothes. She speaks to people in a way that feels confrontational. This is the best one. She moved her computer screen to create a wall of separation between her and myself. And the HR manager entertained these discussions, provided them back to me, and told me that I was the problem and that I now need to go to career coaching so that I can fix myself and be less disruptive to my team and to the organization. And I obviously was furious. I'm like, what? You're telling me this is what people are complaining about, and as the HR manager, you are entertaining that as an actual point of discussion. That is borderline illegal, that you are entertaining that, and that the organization has taken steps for me to rectify the issue, right? So I need to do better at making other people feel comfortable with my presence. And that is frequently what women and people of color, especially people of color, are really asked to do. We're asked to make other people feel comfortable about our presence. And again, that's not something that we can own. And as an organization, that's not something that you should own. You shouldn't own this idea that the employees of color need to make the other employees feel better. As an organization, if you're creating an inclusive environment, then it is your role as the organization and those agents that operate in those capacities to identify the ways in which the organization is not allowing a space for people of color to sort of be themselves. Be themselves. That's it. Because and that was an instance where the organization should have stepped in and said, these aren't complaints that we will even entertain. This is a non-issue. But instead they didn't. And I think, there's this pressure, like you said, to make white people feel comfortable and therefore, excluded is the person of color because they are causing the discomfort. So it's easier to, ostracize and sort of push that person out or move them to make people feel comfortable by muting themselves than it is to deal with the discomfort of the larger cohort and creating greater discord in order to get to a more inclusive environment.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So some real skill building that the other folks in the organization really needed to do in order to recognize that the discomfort that they were feeling was just a natural discomfort that comes from being around somebody who isn't exactly like yourself, and it's okay. You can feel that discomfort, and that's not going to hurt you, and you will get used to it, and you will overcome that. And then the second thing that I was thinking was, oh my God, I sure hope that there are no career coaches out there who would take up that charge and actually do what they were hoping a career coach would do to you to make you less of who you are. Our profession is really about understanding who we really are and being as effective as we can be as ourselves. So I would.
Well, lucky I had a career coach who, after just a little, who I had a previous relationship with, and after a couple conversations, really recognized what was happening as well, and was very sort of upset that the organization had put her in this position, because that really is taking the onus off managing, right? Managing that person as well. You've sort of skipped your management responsibilities as the supervisor and shifted those off to someone else as well, because that would feel uncomfortable for you. So she recognized that. And so a lot of what we spent time on was sort of strategizing what my next steps were and like utilizing our time that way. But you're right, like it was just very disheartening to see that like I was identified as the problem, and that the problem had nothing to do with my work performance or even like my work style. It had to do with people feeling literally just upset and uncomfortable that I was at the organization and that I was doing the work that I was doing. And that honestly, and this is a lot of times like a challenge for people, is that you're really good at your job, because people have very low expectations for you as a woman of color. And they've been told that like, you're not as smart as, like, we know that you didn't go to the best of schools, like we know that. So we don't have high expectations. And so when you sort of blow that shit out of the water, I hope I can say shit, but when you blow that out of the
Hopefully,
water,
that's a situation that calls for swearing.
like when you blow things out of the water, because we have, I mean, I don't know if you know this or not, but people of color have been told since the dawn of time, like you have to be twice as good. Like you
Yeah,
just have
I
to.
know.
And that's a real lived thing. And so there are instances when you blow those things out of the water and people don't know how to respond. And it's strange because if you were white, you blow it out of the water, people are excited. They're like, this is fabulous. Or it's amazing. We want to give you a raise. We want to advance you. And those aren't the same types of responses that women of color frequently get in those instances.
Okay.
So the good thing is there's lots of opportunity for growth and development on both sides, because there's going to be a long road of trust that has to be established for women of color, like in some of these organizations. And I don't know if you saw my article or not that I recently posted again called Brown and Bird Out on corporate America. But that's one of the reasons why a lot of women specifically are leaving corporate America, is that there's, these lack of invisibilities, lack of, the ability to advance, feeling overworked, feeling like you've got to do all of the diversity work. And, as women generally, we already have a lot of additional responsibilities that we have to maintain. And so you really have to start making these choices about like, do I want to be my authentic self? Like, do I want to have a reasonable work-life balance? Like, do I want to feel like respected at work and included? And if you keep sort of getting into a space where that's not happening, you of course ask yourself, am I doing the same thing and getting the same results? And if I am, that I need to change that. And that is, think, why we see so many Black women as like the leading demographic that's starting their own businesses, because we've been experiencing it over and over again. And we've decided that we are not insane and that we have to find a different route to finding professional happiness.
Yeah, yeah. And I thank you so much for even just picking up the thread there that I was actively dropping the thread because I was so overwhelmed with disgust. And you picked it up and you said, yep, action. Let's convert this into action. Let's channel this into changing our approach. And on your end, that might look like starting your own business. On the end of folks who are in the corporate environment, it needs to look like, yes, disgust at what has happened, but changing how things happen.
Absolutely.
So, speaking of starting your own business, what do you want our viewers, anybody who's still with us, uh, to know about Epic Career Network and what you're moving into next?
Yeah, so Epic Career Network is an exciting space. We have online events. Hopefully, we'll do offline if world changes a little bit more here in the future. We offer office hours free of cost for members to the platform, as well as just regular, just fresh, innovative content. We're doing these interviews with different members of the community each month as we work through different themes. And so one of the things that people can know is that you can get real direct feedback from a real person right away. So there are a lot of different services for, say, resumes or LinkedIn profiles, but frequently they make you go through either an online course or like filling out a couple forms before you can talk to a person. And, you know, we're really focused on human connection. So you are able to talk to people right away. When you join the platform, I'm behind the scenes sending you messages and interacting with you and trying to understand what your concerns are. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we are looking to launch some courses and to do some partnerships to provide even additional specialized job search and career advancement support. So we do offer career coaching for individuals that are looking for that help, whether it's in a resume, a cover letter, general career coaching, we offer that. And we're looking to, like I said, create some courses to help people build their business portfolio. So building out your resume in a couple different versions, optimizing your LinkedIn, and then creating like a networking strategy for yourself. And then looking at building and launching your personal brand. And so I'm really, you know, that's where my heart is. So I'm really excited to launch that course soon, where again, we sort of help people figure out what are the communication pillars of your brand. How do you want to codify that, whether that looks like a website or whether that looks like a mobile app or whatever it is that that looks like for you. And then how do you want to launch it? And so I'm excited to sort of offer those additional services coming up in the near future. And then, of course, we are just, you know, out here trying to connect with people and chat with folks and, you know, really bring some levity to the job search, because it can be really challenging, and also bring some support, because you can feel like you are alone. You can feel like you're stuck. You can feel like nobody understands like how hard this is. And that's just part of what it is to let people know that you're not alone in this journey, and that it is completely okay to want to find and do your most authentic work. You don't have to settle for the crumbs that people give you, and that you're not alone.
Beautiful. And how can people find you?
Absolutely. So if you are looking for me, you can always send me an email at Erika, Erika, at coolcreativedesign.com. And you can find Epic Career Network at epic-career-network.com. And we, like I said, are online. That's always a great place to start. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on the Facebooks. So I'm in the interwebs. I basically now exist as like a virtual person. So basically transformed into just like all you'll see is my avatar for like the next 5 years, perhaps. But I think that's where we're going, is virtual reality pretty quickly. So I feel like I'm right on top of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Erika. Thank you for bringing your wisdom and your insight and your joy and your openness. This has been incredibly helpful, I know, for me, and I'm sure it will be for others. So
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much for having me, Amy. This was amazing. I'm so glad we had a chance to talk, and do not hesitate to reach out to me again if there, especially if you get some good follow-up from people who have some additional questions. Would love to, have another conversation or do an AMA and let people kind of get some of those direct questions like out. I know it can be intimidating to find the spaces where you can sort of ask those questions and feel that it's a judgment-free zone. So that's something that I really advocate for, is just a judgment-free zone. I'm not going to make any judgments about what you're thinking or what you're feeling, because if your goal is to really kind of unpack that and process it, then I'm happy to be a part of that.
All right. Thank you so much, Erika.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and thanks to everybody else for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Let's turn this on.